Family. Give thanks. It is the 30th of July, in the year that the Roman Catholic Church established as 2020, many millennia ago. My name is Sam P.K. Collins, also known as Ralph Ploquia Glebwo. I am a grassroots journalist, a teacher, and in DC, and I'm also an organizer for the Pan-African Federalist Movement. The Pan-African Federalist Movement, for those of us who are just here and are unaware, is an effort to globally unify the African diaspora under a political federation that will be called the United, include the 54 nation states within the African continent, as well as the rest of the African diaspora. So this is a fulfillment, once it comes into fruition. We say once it does, not if it does, but once it comes into fruition within the next decade or so, we would have fulfilled Kwame Nkrumah's and wishes, as well as that of other African leaders who formed the Casablanca. And for those of y'all who are unaware, once again, the Casablanca Coalition was really vying for the political unification of the African continent, where each country wouldn't be independent, but each country would be formed under a federation called the United African People would be united, and where they could protect themselves from the balkanization and the exploitation of the powers that be, which includes Europeans, Americans, so forth and so on. And at the time that Kwame Nkrumah was talking about African unification, a lot of African leaders, including, shamefully, William Tubman of Liberia, instead vied for a gradual transformation of the continent, do their thing on their own, and then regionally they would unify, and then eventually it would become a United African States, or United States of Africa. So the reason why I'm bringing this all up, today is a very powerful day. Last week we had a reason people weren't able to hear me. They saw me talking, but unless you read lips, you weren't able to hear exactly what it was that I was saying. But last week was the birth anniversary of His Imperial Majesty, Haile Selassie I, and today we are celebrating Congressman John Lewis of Georgia, who represented Atlanta, for decades. He was a civil rights hero, first and foremost. When he was 23, he spoke at the March on Washington, and he transitioned not too long years, and he rose to a stature of a civil rights legend, somebody well respected, somebody who still engaged the youth, somebody that political leaders in my generation now, millennials, are looking up to as they look to engage the government and become government officials themselves, more specifically elected officials, right? So you have a group of millennials, right? People who want to engage the government, and people who want to enter the government to do. Now, when I say attempted to do, what I am making the case for is that, and once again, I have to say this, and forgive me, I am tired. I've been ripping and running all day. I'm going to get some sleep after this, but I'm going to be very careful with my words, because Pan-Africanists, a lot of what we say gets misconstrued as hating or as being disrespectful to the legend and the legacy of civil rights leaders, and it gets misconstrued as us being ungrateful. By no means am I being ungrateful for, what the Honorable John Lewis did. Is that oftentimes his legacy, right, and the legacy of MLK and other civil rights leaders often gets weaponized, right, by white liberal forces and black liberal forces alike, as a means of keeping black people, oppressed black people in this country, confined to this country and confined to the laws and customs of this country, in a way where we think that the only way to get out of our oppression is to go into the ballot box, right? So those legacies of King, John Lewis, any Anybody else you want to talk about who was a civil that we have today, their legacy gets watered down and it gets weaponized by the powers that be to keep us in line. And however the Most High had it, John Lewis transitioned during an election year, a very powerful election year, an election year in which not only we are uprisings in the age of live stream police brutality, where people can be killed on camera by police 1 second, and the next day or so we burst into a movement. So that is what's been happening over the last couple of months. Since May 20, Africans all over the world, in conjunction with people of other skin colors and races and nationalities, right? They have been in an uprising against police brutality and in support of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and others who have been victims of police brutality and state orchestrated violence, right? So John Lewis died at a very, very, I'm going to say it now, I'm choosing my words very carefully here, and I have no qualms about pushing back against the dominant narrative. That is exactly what I do. You know, I pride myself on that, but I'm also one who chooses his words very carefully. You know, for people like Al Sharpton, Lewis died at a very opportune time, meaning that during an election season, right, where the more radical forces that undergird Pan-Africanism, that undergird the fight for self-determination, that undergird the fight for something that goes well beyond the voting booth and whatever, where people can weaponize his legacy and use that as a means of shaming Pan-Africanists and shaming separatists, right? And shaming those of us who want to look for a better way of self-determination. Those of us who want self-determination rather than represent exactly what happened today during the funeral services for the Honorable John Lewis. When Bill Clinton, and Bill Clinton is another one. Bill Clinton is very sick, you know, as a leader, you know, very sick leader. You know, he framed off to the point where, you know, people called him the first Black president even before Obama got into office. And in my eyes, as a Pan-Africanist, as a self-determined person, as a person who understands us as colonial subjects within the United States, Clinton, Obama, Bush, Reagan, all of them followed the same conservative philosophy. And if you look at history, you see that the Democratic Party has always tried its best to be centrist, especially in the decades and years or so forth following. African people here who are citizens of the United States who have a vote pretty much, they often had to choose between the lesser of two evils. And it just so happens that the lesser of two evils was just, you know, just a little less conservative than Republicans. And Bill Clinton was that mass incarceration happened, right? It was under him, right, that you know, that Haiti, you know, lost its way even more, right? It was under Clinton and Clinton's wife, right, as a government official that you know, that pretty much African people all around the world were less self-determined, right? And you know, it goes to show you, right, that you know, and once again, no disrespect to the legacy of the Honorable John Lewis, but you have to watch who praises you. Who praises you is an indication of I am of the belief that civil rights was not enough. Even Dr. King knew it. Malcolm X knew it, right? He knew it when he was in the Nation of Islam, but he especially knew it after leaving the Nation of Islam and advancing human rights. This was a human rights issue that we were going through in the United States because, you know, not even technically, but we are not citizens. We have a vote, of course, but we are not citizens. We are not protected under the Constitution because it was written at a time when the 3/5 clause was a means of the South to maintain power and to consolidate power and to use African people as property in doing so. So we're not even citizens per se of this country. So for us to even go for voting rights and to go for civil rights only one means of getting what we need. But if we're thinking self-determination, we have to understand that it'll take a whole lot more than voting rights to get us the freedom and self-determination that we need as Africans. As a matter of fact, we need to identify as Africans and not as, and understand that we are in opposition of white allyship and of white people, period, and of the white supremacist system that the United States created along with its cohorts, right, all across the world. So we have to have that understanding first. And the way that Bill Clinton framed it today during John Lewis's funeral, right, was pitting John Lewis against another phenomenal figure. To my transition, had it right, more so than John Lewis. And that brother's name was Kwame Ture, formerly known as Stokely Carmichael. And for those of y'all, who aren't aware, he has, this is a book right here, Ready for Revolution, right? So it's a pretty long book. I admit myself, I still got to go through it some, but it talks about, Stokely, not Stokely, Kwame Ture, stand at one point in time, even he too was a member of SNCC, right? John Lewis and Kwame Ture were together on the freedom rides, right? They were getting whooped on, right? They were getting arrested. So Kwame Ture embraced, right? He embraced the philosophy. Again, for those of y'all who don't know, eventually he got off of that and he embraced Black Power as invented by Mukasa Ricks. People often attribute the whole Black Power concept to Kwame Ture, but history shows us that Mukasa Ricks was the person who was the forerunner, popularized it, and he popularized it at a time when he was transitioning from SNCC leadership to something a bit more internationalist and a bit more radical, right? And Bill Clinton brought that up today in providing comments about John Lewis when that's just to big up John Lewis for advancing, a system that would keep us as second-class citizens per se, right? He said for 2 years, the civil rights movement was in disarray because Kwame Ture was involved, right? As a matter of fact, he didn't even call him Kwame Ture, not the name that he chose, right? He said that for 2 years, the civil rights movement, right, was in disarray. But John Lewis brought it back and he took it out of the hands of Stokely Carmichael, so-called, right? This is Bill Clinton, right? A war criminal, right? A war criminal, right? A man who took on with his wife and his wife's brother, right? A man who along with Joe Biden, brought along mass incarceration. A man who, along with Hillary Clinton, right, peddled that birther theory, a lot of people like pointing the finger at Trump, like Trump was the only one to ever do stuff. But you have to understand, it's not just about the president, it's about the entire system. If you're going to indict the president, you can't just indict one president. You got to indict many of the presidents for here in the United States of America. And then after you indict the presidents, you got to indict the system itself, right? H. Rap Brown said that not even a Black president can bring about the systemic change that we need, because in order to become president, you have to rise in the ranks, right? And in your campaigns. And given the fact that African people in the United States, according to the census, constitute for 13% candidate for office for one of the majority parties, let alone a Democratic Party, that you're going to become president, right? Or even a candidate by speaking about nationalism. Not unless it's American nationalism and it's an American first policy, or it's a policy that's more liberal where we're a melting pot, where we accept all cultures, where racism doesn't exist. You can't become president by talking about Black nationalism, right? You can only talk about things that will appease the power structure. And so I say all of that to say that even though John Lewis movement as a figure in his later life that, you know, represented us in Congress, that paved the way for the opening of the Smithsonian African American Museum, that took young leaders under his wing, he was still weaponized in his life as well in his death as a means of keeping Black people in the United States of America under a system of oppression, and to feel that they case that Pan-African nationalism, that Pan-African federalism, that anything that is Pan-African is not the enemy of Black people. As a matter of fact, you have to identify not as a member of the United States family, because the United States family encompassing of the white male and sometimes the white female. You understand? You know, the white woman, right? Because even she is an enemy of African people. You understand? Globally, okay? So we got to get that straight. We got to understand who our true enemies are, okay? And Kwame Ture understood that, which is why he made the jump from SNCC into something more radical, and eventually left the United States, not of his own volition, but left the United States in order to organize on the African continent, right under the AAPRP, who himself advanced the ideas of Kwame Nkrumah, who advanced the ideas of Malcolm X, who advanced more radical ideas, right? That prioritized African nationalism over that of a country millennia, and will continue to do so until we organize amongst ourselves, right? And this doesn't happen by happenstance, y'all. It's very systemic, right? And, you know, John Lewis, once again, while, you know, I will honor him as an ancestor, you know, I won't speak on, you know, I could do better than him and stuff like that. What I am going to say is that, and I'm saying this specifically to the civil rights minded elders, right, in the audience, if you are there, right? Every generation has a calling, right? And especially when it comes to matters of our liberation, first we got to know who we are and where we come from. We are not slaves. We were enslaved, okay? Healers, they took warriors, so forth and so on from the African continent, and they brought us here and they enslaved us, right? And they gave us a name and they made us property, right? So we are not of the United States government. We are of the, in fact, the Ma'afa, long before the Ma'afa, African people circumvented the entire world. So we were going to all of these places, even North America, long before they got here. So we are not of the United States government. As a matter of fact, experiment that's been working well for a long time, because African people, especially after the civil rights movement, bought into the notion that with a vote, they had power, when in fact, that is not the case. You cannot have power if you're voting in evils, because by the end of the day, even if you are a Democrat in a city like Washington, D.C., which at one point in time was majority Black, you are still an organ. You are still an organ, right? Of a majority power structure that is. Now, Sam, what are you talking about? What do you mean? You know, my mother was a Democrat. My father was a Democrat. My folks marched with King. You know, we got these rights to vote. We got Black mayors, this, so forth and so on, right? I'm about to lay out the evidence for y'all, man. Listen, y'all. Kwame Ture, right? They wrote it, all right? You know, and this has been a book, right? That is a case study in how, you know, power is the ultimate goal, right? Power is the treat, not rights, not any of that. We want power, right? What does power mean? Power means self-determination. It means control over your local affairs in your community. It means economic consolidation. It means being able to have control over your affairs at any time at any moment and not having outside. Frankly, we don't have power other than that which is spiritual and mental, but we have yet to tap into that because a lot of us do not identify with the African continent. We identify with the United States of America. And in this book, on page 90 or so, right, with the formation of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, this provides a very, very powerful case study, right, about how the Democratic Party snuffed out efforts for Black people to organize in a racist cracker-ass state. Forgive my language. That's exactly what Mississippi was and most likely is. You know, I haven't been down there, but I know people who are from there, and they attempted to organize in alignment with the Democratic Party. They got snuffed out. And here is an excerpt that shows us that. The National Party, so National Party meaning the Democratic Party, the National Party's answer to the MFDP was, of course, no. Intense pressure had been brought to bear on the delegates from the White House itself, and under it, the coalition dissolved. Most of the MFDP's allies, MFDP delegates to their knees. Several delegates told SNCC workers that they could not afford to buck the Johnson-Humphrey team. When pushed to the wall in this manner, and this is an excerpt from a document that's coming up. Forgive me, I'm sweating like a preacher here. When pushed to the wall in this manner, these delegates would frankly admit that they stood to reap such a significant political, and they could not take the chance of supporting the MFDP, having it win, and thus deny to Humphrey the vice presidential nomination. These Humphrey supporters were convinced that suppression of the MFDP was end of excerpt. The rewards and punishments to be had from the administration far outweighed anything the powerless Black people of Mississippi could do for or against them. At one point, the MFDP reportedly had on the floor of the convention and to force a roll call vote, which might have seated the Black delegates. But once the White House machinery went into motion, that support did a swift fade out. So here you have a local political party, right? A local political party that was, not even exclusively Black, right? So the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party was going to be multicultural, multiracial. It was going to, align under the Democratic Party. It was going to be open, right? It was going to pave the way for Mississippians, Black Mississippians in particular, right? Exclusively Black Mississippians to get their civil rights realized, right? And to finally get on the political stage and have the adequate representation that they needed. But because the people who were forming the party were a lot of the Democratic Party, and they had Democratic sentiments, and they were beholden to Lyndon B. Johnson, they in the end decided to sabotage any chance of success that they had. And that was because at the time they saw that material power was more valuable than their self-determination. I'm going to say that again, valuable than their self-determination. And self-determination, once again, for those of y'all who are unaware, means control of your political affairs. Now, people may argue that, Sam, at the time, we didn't have control of our political affairs. How could we, have been able to, divest from the Democratic Party as a minority and, do this and that? We have to align with our allies. This is a talking point that has been around for as long as we've been here on this island, this colonial island that is the United States of America, right? This has been going on for a long time. We've always been called on to align ourselves, right, as a so-called minority in this country with the Democratic Party or just whoever at the time was a benefactor to Black people, right? But that is erroneous assumption that we are a minority, because once you align yourselves with people who have a similar history and a similar heritage than you, not only are you not a minority, but you are part of a global majority that is outside the walls of the oppressive system that is way of life, right? At the time when that party was founded and the efforts to coincide with the Democratic Party were made, we did not totally have, not when I say we, I mean people who were of that contingent. They probably were not ready to entertain or to identify, right, with the African continent, or to identify with the diaspora. Okay. And you guys have to understand that happened within the same time frame, let's say within the decade or so, that the Casablanca bloc is states of Africa, right? What we today call the United African States. So mind you, right, had the United African States come to fruition, had Malcolm X been successful in his attempts to bring the United States before the UN for human rights violations, right? African people on this continent, in this country, would have been more self-determined than before. But instead, we've been duped into advancing voting rights exclusively, into advancing piecemeal legislation, right? Even a voting right a few years or so. Reason being why, a lot of liberal-minded politicos and commentators are really pressing Mitch McConnell to pass a voting rights bill, right, in John Lewis's name that would, I guess, solidify our voting rights in this country. But once again, we're being narrow-minded by focusing exclusively on voting rights, because it's not just about the vote. It's about power in the sense that you have control over your destiny. With voting rights, even though you do have the power to vote per se, the Electoral College, I hope, I'm going to build with y'all that we building here, y'all. We are building, y'all. The Electoral College, right, as created during the 3/5 compromise, right? The votes are given to delegates who at one point in time were enabled to decide whether or not to follow the will of the people. So locally, you might have some semblance of voting power, but nationally, you do not, especially when it comes to voting for president. So you have delegates choosing for you. As a matter of fact, the Electoral College was the reason why Trump won the election, right? If I recall correctly, Hillary won the popular vote, but not even that could get Trump out of office. So instead, what liberal-minded people have done for the last 4 years is shame us into voting. Oh, you guys got to vote. But that wasn't even the case. Two very important reasons. It was the Electoral College, and even along with that, voter suppression. So even if we do vote, and don't get me wrong, I'm going to vote. I'm not voting for Trump, and I'm not voting for Biden. But I'm going to vote for somebody, and I'm going to let y'all know who I vote for when I decide. But I'm not voting for the lesser of two evils, because me, I'm a self-determined African. I use the tools that my ancestors provide to take us to the next level, because that's what it's about. Right now, we're at a wall, okay? We had chattel slavery, we had Jim Crow, and now we got the war on drugs. Well, we got the war on drugs, and now we're in this new era where people do not want to push beyond what our ancestors gave us. Our ancestors did not fight for voting rights just so that we can depend exclusively on voting rights, okay? You get voting rights and you continue on in your fight for liberation and self-determination. It doesn't stop with us identifying with the American empire. It stops with us finally realizing the goal of Pan-African nationalism and realizing self-determination, where we have control over our affairs and people aren't getting gentrified out of their communities, and schools aren't teaching our children the stuff that we need. See, ever since the civil rights movement, and ever since they killed off our revolutionaries and they scared us and they drugged us and they imprisoned us, African people on this continent and in this country have been scared of self-determination. And there's no more perfect example than this whole dilemma with whether or not to open up schools, right? Now, mind you, DC announced today that virtual learning will take place at least for the first quarter of the school year. That's very great news. Students and teachers won't be won't be exposed to the coronavirus in any form or fashion. That's very great news. But I'm making that point to say that over the last few weeks, and especially since the state of emergency happened, a lot of liberal stations, NPR in particular, have been pumping these talking points about African people's inability. No, not even African people. Let's say let's say how they say it. Communities of color, impoverished communities, talking about their inability uh, to pay for supplies, to get technology, in order to have a good environment. What about those poor kids in those poor neighborhoods that we created? What about their ability to learn? We can't get them. I stop right there to say that we have created a culture of dependency in this country, especially after the civil rights movement and during the war on drugs, pretty much, right? They've created a culture of dependency where we no longer have families, but we are beholden to the nonprofit industrial complex, and we are beholden to the government for everything that we need, to the very point where we don't even know our children anymore. Your teachers that don't like your kids in the public school system know your children more than you do, because they see your children at their most authentic self during those 8 hours a day. So now that the schools are closed physically and we're going to virtual learning, they're pumping this narrative that communities can't do without the school building, that parents will pull their hair out and will go into a frenzy trying to figure out how to accommodate their children during these times. We are reverting back to a time when we were indigenous. Everything that is happening right now is a calling on African people to return to their indigenous ways, to embrace philosophies that were taken from us during the Ma'afa and during African colonialism. The Babylon system is falling, so it's incumbent upon us to try to figure out how to do without as much as possible, given the fact that the American political system in all forms and fashions will fall very soon. If not during this term, then maybe the next term or the term after that. But the fact is that it is falling. Today, it was reported that the GDP for the United States economy fell by 32%, the greatest fall in recent history, family. So who's to say what's going to happen within the next few years, y'all? I'm not telling Collins told y'all not to vote, that voting is dumb. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is that people have yet to be politically educated in how to use a vote, in how to organize as a unit. In America, we have been taught to be individualistic and depend only on the vote, right? And to give our power to leaders instead of organizing at the grassroots, consolidating our power and demanding stuff for our vote, right? And like I said last week, when I was on mute the whole time, goddamn, electoral power is the last frontier, but electoral power at the same time assumes that the system is created in your favor. There is no such thing as electoral power per se for African people in a system like the United States of America, where the Electoral College was created pretty much to dilute the vote in the very first place, and where gerrymandering over the last few years has been designed to break up majority Black districts so that Black people can't even consider that voting exclusively is the only way to create change. And when it's done here, people, they just give their votes to people. They don't even make demands. They don't even look at the record. They vote in fear. They vote out of a lack of knowledge of self and out of a lack of knowledge about what is possible. We have yet to push beyond the civil rights narrative, and it has really diluted the quality of education and the radicalness of education for our children, to the very point that when you introduce figures like Marcus Messiah Garvey, Queen Mother Moore, when you introduce John Henry Clark, Francis Cress Welsing, they haven't even heard of these people, because all they heard about was Martin Luther King Jr., John Lewis, the late Reverend Vivian, and other folks who fought for civil rights exclusively and not for self-determination nation of African people. I'm talking federal police and local police, even as they're killing us. People are told to go vote. So even as John Lewis's body lies dormant and is being laid to the ground, they are still pumping the narrative to keep us enslaved, psychologically and physically and mentally enslaved in the system where we are dependent on the American government at a time when the American government is showing us now more than. So the question is, what is it that we do here, Sam? What is the solution? What do you suggest? And oftentimes, people who ask me that are those who pretty much depend on voting, right? They're very short-minded. They're what feels like a long time, right? They're operating in fear, right? They're speaking at it from a position of weakness where all they know is American politics, where they want to ignore, the militaristic campaigns that take place abroad, the very campaigns that are very like the campaigns that happen against Black people, the majority Black communities. They ignore all of that. They don't have an internationalist mindset. So when you talk about the militaristic campaigns of Obama in Libya and Afghanistan, when you talk about the fact that Obama unleashed federal troops in the Ferguson evils, they talk about symbolism, they talk about voting rights, they talk about civil rights, right? But they don't talk about humanity. They don't talk about internationalism. They don't talk about nationalism in the sense of being Pan-African and identifying with the continent and support continue to pillage us, right? Because everything that we enjoy here as so-called Americans has been taken from our counterparts in Africa, right? The very same materials that power our iPhones can be found in the Congo and other parts of the continent, y'all. They take it from them to give to us to keep us enamored with the American system, so we are beholden to the American system instead of identifying with Africa. And it's a matter of the whole continent, because they are, under the impression that given the diversity of the African continent, we can't unify under one united African states. But the European Union does it, right? White people, for as long as the word white's been around, they've changed the definition over millennia to fit the profile and to combat the proliferation of the melanated race. So at one point in time, white, at another time it also meant Catholic, then Italiano, and shoot, man, even Jewish. You understand, right? So they are clicking up against us, and we are here behind enemy lines, not understanding exactly what political organization means, and what unity and what self-determination means. So we are here still beholden to the American system, right? Which weapon, right? To advance our rights. They use them. They use their legacies to pump, mantras and slogans and causes like the extension of the Voting Rights Act. Mind you, I'm not against that. But what I'm saying is that voting is not enough. It's about organization within the United States of America as African people within, and our connection with other African people across the world, which is easier, much easier now than it ever has been, and which will become easier when we become a United States. Before I wrap up today, because it's hot in here, I just want to. Oh, true. Okay, never mind. Cool. So, I will call you back, brother. I'm gonna read this for y'all because we're gonna take it internationally, y'all. See, I'm a self-determined African man, right? I don't even got the AC on right now because I already know what it is. I work for myself. I'm a contractor, right? We're gonna have to cut back on certain resources at times, and we're gonna have to, escape vanity, and we're gonna have to get the income when we're really assessing what it is that we need versus what it is that we want. Now, mind you, I'm gonna turn the AC on again, but it'll probably be tonight when I'm sleeping. But for the time being, I'm not gonna do that because I understand what bills are. And I understand that as long as I'm anywhere with anybody who is working within the American paradigm. So as I'm learning to work for myself, right, as a Rasta man and as a Pan-Africanist, I'm also learning to do without certain amenities in order to fulfill a mission of Pan-African self-determination individually, within my family, and as a nation. So don't mind the sweat, y'all. It's just the sweat of a hardworking man, y'all. I'm gonna close with this right here. In this book right here, I stay presenting the books, y'all. The books is where it's at, y'all. You know, King Solomon, y'all. For those of y'all, religion, y'all spiritual, so-called, or whatever else. I understand that. Don't get me wrong, but like I'm not here to peddle theology on y'all, but the reason why I identify with the Rastafari movement is because it's about the ancient future. It's about the redemption of African who understand the divinity of His Imperial Majesty. Do so not because we're crazy or because we are followers, right? We aligned what the biblical scriptures said, the same biblical scriptures that were taken from us, right, and manipulated and used against us. The scriptures that were hidden from us, right, in that book predicted just what happened to Selassie and so you're talking about the global redemption of African people, right? Where the Duke of Gloucester or Gloucester, whatever they call it over there in the UK, he came with the scepter that they took from Ethiopia and gave it back to His Imperial Majesty. His Imperial Majesty was called the Conquering Lion of Judah, right? If you go to Revelation chapter 5, right, you see the prediction of what happened in 1930, because history is not linear as the Urugu will want for you to know it as. History is now has happened before in one fashion or form, right? Which goes to show you that our redemption as African people happens when we look at ourselves not as paupers in a colonial system, but as kings and queens of our own destiny. And that is exactly what, as an African man, and I'm saying this today because, man, I went in last week during the birthday celebration and y'all heard nothing. So I gotta articulate that for y'all right now. And part of redemption for an African man and woman is letting go of vanity, the Most High. In the United States of America, the politicians, right? They are the sons of man because they represent the king. They are beholden to the power structure, especially if they are a part of the Democratic and Republican Party. The sons of man, okay? The sons of the Most High are those who are part of the so-called minority. They are the ones speaking out for self-determination. They are the ones seeking to establish a nobility for the African woman and man. You understand? They're the ones who shy away from centric standards, who grow their locks out, right? The ones who are speaking about Africanness, right? Not Americanness, but an African identity, y'all. That is exactly what we need in these times. And doing that requires what Malcolm said, requires us to not look at ourselves as minorities, but to identify as an African nation that is global. And many decades ago, African leaders made a very serious mistake of not identifying with their counterparts, with the power structure, the European American power structure. And it's very pivotal. It's very pivotal, y'all, that I'm speaking to y'all on the 30th of July. You hear me? 4 days after Liberia commemorated its independence in 1847, after the settlers, right, freed Africans from the United States of America when they repatriated to the Grain Coast, right? Okay, the Grain Coast, Liberia. Okay, between 1820 to 1847, Liberia, and then they got their independence, right? But part of the reason why Liberia was even formed, it was formed as a means for America to establish power on the continent and to establish influence, much to the chagrin of Kwame Nkrumah, and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. Marcus Garvey had every intention of taking the Black Star Line and putting our people on it and repatriating us to Cape Palmas, Liberia. Cape Palmas just happens to be where my father's folks are from, the Gribbo people, okay? Focal point for the repatriation of African people under the Universal Negro Improvement Association, right? But W.E.B. Du Bois, y'all saw W.E.B. before the whole Niagara movement and before he established the word Pan-African nationalism. African nationalism was what people espouse. Now, I don't get caught up in the wordplay. You know, I say Pan-African nationalism, I say African nationalism, I say Pan-Africanism. African unification is all that it is to me. But the point that I'm making is today, what they do is they pit us against one another and they make us forget exactly who we are, okay? Bill Clinton pit John Lewis against Kwame Ture, and he heralded John Lewis as a key reason why African people are still in bondage today. And he did that at the expense of Kwame Ture, who he disrespectfully called by his birth name that he absolved himself of when he found himself as an African nationalist. You understand? Okay, so that same situation happened on the African continent once again, and I gotta out Liberia, okay? Because Liberia, I ain't been there yet. You hear me? I ain't been there, understandably, but I'm gonna say this. The reason why Liberia is the way that it is right now has to do with its identity. America has cursed Liberia, okay? And Ellen Johnson Sirleaf said it during her interview when she first came into office that Liberia had a reckoning to do. Whether Liberians were going to identify more with the United States or with Africa, were more Africans than were American, right? And I believe that. Trust me, I believe that. And I will go toe to toe any day of the week with any other continental African of any other nationality who tries to tell me that Liberians are a Francophone nation, a German-speaking nation, an English-speaking nation. You too have lost a part of your culture because of the colonial powers that have taken over the continent since the Berlin Conference, y'all. So there's no way that you can call Liberians so-called, because I'm not going to identify with the country of my parents. I will identify with the continent. And for sometimes I will identify with the region as West Africans and Africans in general. We have to acknowledge the fact that the United States of America did not out of goodwill. It was a means of first Christianizing the nation underneath, you know, the Babylon Judeo-Christian paradigm, and also establishing the US's influence on the African continent. Able or prodded, you know, I'll say it. I wholeheartedly believe that Tubman was prodded into, you know, bucking any attempt by Kwame Nkrumah and the Casablanca bloc to unify the African states under on Tubman, just like they did on WEB and the Liberian officials during the 1920s, to stop them from espousing Pan-Africanism. The very same way they used Liberia once again to stop Kwame Nkrumah from forming a United States of Africa. As a matter of fact, it was also out of fear that Kwame Nkrumah might advance, you know, Marxism or someone wanted to be the big man, the president of the United States of Africa. But I am of the belief that neither of that was the case. I think that Kwame Nkrumah had noble intentions. He understood what it was, but at the same time, it's very hard work unifying African people. But what we cannot negate to understand today is that even though we are different, the people outside of our culture and outside of our paradigm see us as all the same. And they will pit us against one another. They will balkanize our nations. They will keep minority, and they are hoovers. They are people who siphon off resources and use it for their own good. They have taken us away from our systems and from who we are, and they will continue to do so as long as we don't identify with the continent and as long as we don't unify politics in which we can thrive, in which we can build up economically, in which we are protected. Black America is a nation within a nation. And as long as we identify with the American system, we will never be free. So in identifying with the African continent, we organize Africa is free. She can help us in our fight to be free here. I envision a day where Black people here will have their own nation in addition to a free Africa. Stay here in your nation, self-determined, right? In your own schools, in your own neighborhoods, outside of the influence of a white power structure. And, I understand, loving versus the state of Virginia, a lot of mixed, it's a bit more complicated than what it was before. But, the fact remains that, we as African people, and I do identify as an African, whether or not I'm first generation American or not, or whether or not you were here for 500 years, you're still African. We have dominant genes. So, our genes, even though they try to water it down, you still got some Afrocentricity in there. You still got Blacktricity in there, family. So you have to identify with the African continent. You have to know who you are. You have to know who your enemies are. And you have to know, and we have to acknowledge the fact that it's not about civil rights or voting rights exclusively anymore. It's about human rights. It's about human rights, and it's about making sure that not only are we free nominally, but we're free and being self-determined. Before I do, I want to read an excerpt from a book that you guys should really take a look at. This book is called The New Pan-Africanism 2020. It was written by a brother, a Baba named Edward Herbert Brown Jr. He is also known as Baba Amsada. He is America. So for those of y'all unaware, the Pan-African Federalist Movement is a global movement. We're organizing here in DC, and we organize, on different blocks and different continents. So this brother right here, he has been advocating for United here. I'm annotated. Shout out to my English students. You got to annotate to understand, mark your book up. If your book ain't marked up, you ain't read that. Let them know that, man. We ain't no, listen, we are bibliophiles here. You hear me? We mark up books. So what I did here, all right, this speaks to what happened after Ghana secured its independence. All right. And I'm going to read just a paragraph here before we sign off. Y'all ready? Just 1 year after Ghana's independence, Nkrumah set the framework for the next stage of the African struggle, the victory which will ultimately be Ghana's greatest legacy and gift to African people globally. At the All-African People Meeting of Independent African States and Liberation Movements early in 1958, documents, forward then to independence, independence now. Tomorrow, the United States of Africa. Nkrumah's proclamation that day was in full historical alignment with the sentiments often expressed by Garvey in his speech in the writings of the mid-1920s. For example, an 11-stanza poem written by Garvey in 1927 entitled Hail, United States of Africa. Nkrumah saw the founding of the now defunct Organization of African Unity, also known as the OAU at the time, as somewhat of a half measure and great disappointment. He did not seek the establishment of another organization. He sought and proposed that the machinery be put in place for the establishment of a continental government of Africa, right? So we tried, we tried the formation of the, we tried that. And basically all of that didn't work out. Hold on one second, I'm gonna let my man in. All of that did not work out. And basically, what happened was that Africa was not united. Africa still has not been united. I got my good brother Doc Shepard on the line here. I just let him in the room. We do got a few minutes. Matter of fact, yeah, my man, perfect. Thanks for coming in, man. Pretty much, and just why it's very important. If you don't mind, I'm gonna give you the floor just to provide some comments, if that's cool. Just your thoughts on that whole concept.
Okay, hopefully I'm heard. I'm outside doing laundry right now, but I got a little minute. I was just having a conversation about this the other day with a friend of mine about how the disconnect that we see amongst people on the outside is a manifestation of the disconnect that we have with ourselves internally. A lot of us are moving around, we go to work and we make sure that we living, we're eating, and we pay our bills. We're kind of like surviving, and we're not really in connect with ourselves. The jobs that we have aren't really in tune with who we are as individuals, because a lot of people just don't really even know who really they are. They don't really take the time to look in the mirror and say, this is me, this is what I have to bring to the table, et cetera, et cetera. So possibly I think that's one of the first things when it comes to unifying each other, is unifying, with ourselves, with our true inner selves. Yeah. That also leads into the spirituality of it all, and not having really a real spiritual basis, where again we're unifying from a survival base, and not a real family or spiritual base. Like it's still done in survival, and as long as we stuck there, it doesn't really give us the access to as much power as we really have. But that's definitely the only way forward. The only way forward is unifying. The only way forward is aggregating, our individual selves, our individual resources, our individual beings into, one, black mass, if you will, black hole, if you will. And this isn't just us in America. So as we know that, Christianity is kind of pushed, making its way through Africa, made its way through Africa, and, continental Africa, and they've been internally and externally colonized. So, it's a long road to take, but at the same time, the truth is like the sunlight. You can't really block it, but for so long, it's just about awareness and, coming in with that base of understanding. So even if it's, I don't know how many people on this call, maybe, but even with just the people on this call, or in these meetings, being organized and showing a solid front, a solid unified front, gives people an example of something to join, and something that works. I feel like that's the direction that we're going in, and that's the direction that we should be going in with all of our being.
My man, thank
Okay. Okay.
you, sir.
Yeah.
I got a question for you, if you don't mind.
Yes, sir.
Like, would you mind speaking about spirituality in the context of like metaphysics? Because people, we often get confused about what spirituality is. Can you give your take on that? Just as like, yeah.
Okay, so from from the surface level, like I said, like I mentioned at first, it becomes about knowing yourself, having a good, solid understanding of yourself, and I mean that from both a physical and a mental and a spiritual point of view. So when I say physical, I mean like physically knowing yourself, physically knowing your body and how it works, how to keep it healthy, how to exercise and be strong, have a strong physical disposition. And then the mental disposition of having mental awareness of the different sciences that the world runs by, whether it be math, biology, chemistry, etc. And being able to use our minds to even contemplate and deduce from data, or contemplate new data, create new things, or discover new things. There's nothing new out of the sun, but discover new things and how we can use them. And then from that spiritual metaphysical concept of just the concepts that we can't physically touch. So, excuse me, the concept that we can't physically touch. So, like love, for example, or trust and respect and understanding. And these are metaphysical terms, and we don't think of it as that because we tend to give a physical or a tangible equivalent to those words versus seeing them as, it transcends the physical world, and then from a deeper perspective of the metaphysics in terms of energy and electricity and our collective consciousness and that type of thing, the aggregation of energy, one person can do a lot. Two people can actually do more together than they will both be able to do, separately. And it's something about, the aggregation. It's like a third entity, if you will. It creates a third entity by two people working at something together, having multiple perspectives. In terms of the collective consciousness of what we would call a God concept, or however you want to call it. There's something to be said about momentum, and multiple people in the same direction. Of one of the definitions of church is multiple people in congregation. So that it's in different spiritual systems, and they word it in their own ways, but it's essentially we're saying the same thing. A congregation of energy manifesting momentum in a given direction. So all of those concepts put together, create a basis of understanding for everybody to move from, even if we're all in our own given direction. So say one person is for education, one person is for economics, one person is for labor, one is for, the war aspect, etc. Not even just because we're not all literally going at the same, tackling the same problem, we're all going in the same direction, and all of them are needed. All of them are needed.
Exactly. What are your thoughts about, because like in the age of the internet, there's a whole lot of different opinions going around. Everybody got their own little group, so people might, even though we might identify as, right. I guess Pan-Africanist so-called, right? You might have people who follow various streams of the cause. They might believe in this aspect, but not that aspect, right? How do we unify despite all of that? Because it's like folks are still stuck in their ways. They can't imagine themselves, unifying despite petty differences, so-called.
So in a perfect situation, I would tell you that truth overall. You know what I mean? The awareness of what the truth actually is should unify people. But we do know that, like you said, sometimes petty differences sometimes overshadows logic in a way. And to that end, I say that if a group of people are building and they're all building towards justice, they're all building towards a form of liberation in some type of way, that individual sect can just, in my opinion, do that. You know what I mean? People who agree with them in that being, in that beingness, should do that. And in terms of the resources or the energy that they manifest, it still takes an organizational leader to organize the individual sects together. It takes a level of maturity to say that, you know, the agree to disagree concept.
Exactly.
And as long as, you know, we can be mature enough to say, okay, I may not agree with everything that you're saying, but we all facing in the same direction and we can organize, you know. I don't think that anyone disagrees that we all need food. I don't think anyone disagrees we all need water. I don't think anyone disagrees that we all need housing, clothing, healthcare, educate. You know, there's just certain things that we all gonna agree on. So, you know, if you know, everybody's not gonna turn vegan. I'm vegetarian, vegan. You know, everybody's not gonna turn vegan, but you know, I'm still sure everybody wants to eat. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
So, like, we're gonna need those people that, you know, aren't vegan. That's gonna have to raise our chickens for our eggs, and you know, get you know, some people aren't off the dairy, so we're gonna need people that raise cows for milk and beef and leather and whatever, you know. And that's not actually a problem. The uniqueness and the diversification is actually what makes us stronger. So, you know, just be mature enough to agree to disagree sometimes, and you know, be mature enough to accept new information, or at least be able to contemplate the new information. Don't just deny it just because it goes against your current consciousness, because nobody starts out knowing literally everything. So,
Definitely.
you know, as long as we can keep that maturity in our minds, I feel like that as long as the organizers, you know, not necessarily at the top, but in a way at the top, can maneuver people's personalities, you know, and organize it to where the people can all profit and use those resources, then we should be fine.
Hey, I wanted to you know, and I'll provide some context, right? You know, so like over the last couple of years or so, you know, every time like an elder dies or transitions rather, I feel older, because it's like, all right, that person accomplished so much and they're gone, and now it's like our time is up. And you know, what is the current landscape looking like among members of our generation in terms of like nation builders? You know, and
That's an interesting question. I would say that more of us are starting to understand its importance. More of us are starting to understand that, you know, why we need it, and the having conversations that used to not occur. What I do see, what I'm unfortunately seeing, is enough of us aren't involving ourselves in the building of infrastructure. So we may know about it. We may know people who are into real estate, but are they into it for the fix and flip just to make the profit, or are we really trying to house people? Like, the reasoning for why they're doing it again still goes back to that survival concept. Like, they still feel like a personal amassing of wealth is the point, and without real organization towards the actual building of what needs to be in terms of a nation. I I had an interview yesterday on a friend of mine's podcast where I mentioned a concept that I like to, mention. Oh, excuse me, 1 second. Like I said, I'm outside. Yeah, so there's a concept that I mentioned that when it comes to nation building, I like to speak on. If whoever's listening, if you take the size of Washington, D.C., D.C. isn't that big, but a lot is housed here. A lot of people live here, and a lot of government buildings are here, and a lot of important things go on in Washington, D.C. What I like to impose upon people's minds to picture is that practically every state in the United States, if we were to just speak, continental on this side, every state in the United States has a mass of land that's DC size that's not being used. So if we was to really be organized, we could organize our resources and buy up land the size of DC practically anywhere and build it to our specs. But that takes a level of organization, and that takes a level of resources that of organization of those resources that most people don't think to that size. But I don't think everybody should. I don't think everybody should be, feel like that they need to be head leader all the time of everything. I feel like that when you look back at when Africa was at its peak, most people were tradesmen. Most people were professionals. Right. They weren't, most people weren't calling shots for everybody. They did what they did, and they were just organized within the country or kingdom that they lived in. And I feel like that's the way that we should go about it. We should organize our professionals in such a way where we can maximize their knowledge, resource base, etc., into an organization, essentially. Exactly. An organization. The United States itself is but an organization. We know this to be true in terms of corporation. It's just organizations, and what they've done is they've backed their ability to impose their organization's will with the military, which is a very good strategy to do. So I don't think that we need to reinvent the wheel. I just think we just need to organize to build our own wheel in a sense. So I think that more of us are open to the idea of it, but in terms of the implementation, we still need a level of leadership and organization and just the thoughts of thinking that big, enough of us that can organize people and maneuver around people's, personalities, people's egos, people's professions, and that type of thing to put that type of a plan in place and take the incremental steps that's needed, in the infrastructure building from the ground, from seed to table and back to seed, that needs to just be implemented by, organizers.
Yeah, that's definitely true, man. I often grapple with this in my mind. Once again, speaking about millennials, we're a very highly educated group, definitely. Very professional group, man. Like a lot of us got it in terms of, accolades, professional trajectory, jobs, all that stuff, man. And I look at that, and I often look at that as like the fulfillment of an integrationist vision, that was imposed on us by our parents and by our grandparents, by people who experienced just what John Lewis went through. So given all of that, like I often worry about the potential for us to carry this out, because it's just as easy for you to put down a project if you don't agree with somebody and go back to the status quo. Absolutely. I'm thinking about like, do we have the wherewithal to endure, the next few years of hardship, because stuff's gonna get worse before it gets better. What are your thoughts on that? As far as just our professional class within the millennial generation and our ability to use what we got for nation building rather than integration?
So I think our people are smart enough. I think I think one of the reasons that one of the things that makes us great is the thing that's actually holding us back.
Yeah.
I believe that we're not, our generation isn't creating UNIA. You know what I mean? Our generation isn't creating NAACP. These are organizations that when they started, the professional Black people got behind because it was a mess. That's why I was saying in terms of a black hole, an organized black hole is going to draw in energy.
Yeah.
Right now, we just don't have people who are drawing in infrastructure energy. We have people that are like drawing in entertainment energy, you know, apparel energy and clothes and that type of thing. But I feel like if a solid enough mass was organized enough, and when I say that, I mean the United States pays people. The United States has resources. The United States has power and water and housing and land, and you know what I'm saying. It's if you as an organization can't match that in a feasible way that allows for them to continue living, that allows them to continue getting the things that are important to them, then there's no reason for them to switch, quite frankly. So by us being as smart as we are, it's like, okay, we may know that nation building is the move, but can I pay my, am I living in a house next year if I do this? You know what I mean? Like, until we tackle, those issues, if our professionals still have to go to, some other IT company, some other energy company, some other, water company, if they have to go to those places for their jobs, they're less likely to, to do something that will usurp the system that gave them that job. So until we're organized enough to say, okay, you work with us, you work for us, we have housing, we have food, you can have the things that are important to you, but we created them. We created them. We manufacture clothes. We have, farming and, that type of thing. Until you can match it, it would be far-fetched, really, for a professional individual to give up their position. Not to say that it doesn't happen, because we do know people who just take that sacrifice and, we go about it in that way. But it's almost far-fetched to believe that a masses would do that without a level of organization.
Definitely. I often think about education, like how our schools are, within nation building, schools are very important because, young people, they got to be able to be put in a direction where like they can learn who they are first and then grow into industries that are important to infrastructure. This is my last question, before we wrap up for the night, man. I just want to thank you again for signing on. I'm not, you were very, 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 very timely. And we talked about this before. Talk to me about infrastructure. What does infrastructure look like with as much detail as possible?
Infrastructure. So we're aware of blockchain and like Bitcoin and that type of thing.
Yes, sir.
Quite frankly, I feel like that the internet and and blockchain is like our best hope. Quite frankly, our ability to make our own currency and back that currency with resources. So the individual who owns a farm, they have a commercial size, a commercial amount of food. And now you can buy that food with our currency. So now we have the impetus to pay people with that currency because you can actually buy things with it. People who own the buildings, the real estate, the land, you can move into the house, but use our currency to pay your bills, which means that we got to have a system of powering the house, whether that be solar panels, wind energy, the renewable resources of the world. The water thing. So the United States military pretty much owns the oceans and the lakes of the United States, but the one thing they don't own is the rainwater. So if we were to collect rainwater at a commercial scale and be able to filtrate that and run that through our own plumbing that our tradesmen set up, and literally build a city, how they have like Chinatown and that type of thing. You would start out with something relative to that. You start out with like a Chinatown, or in our case, an Africa town, Little Africa.
Exactly.
And then just build around it. You know what I mean? We have our own power, our own water, our own food, with our own manufacturing. We can plant cotton, we can plant hemp, we can plant all of these things, and we can manufacture things. We could stitch our own and sewing machines, and we can do these things. But it just has to be a level of organization, like I said, to say that, okay, we have our own currency. Now we have our resources and our goods. Our goods can be bought with our currency. And because they have the online trading platforms, we can actually sell our currency for US dollars. So if we need things from US, with US currency, it just becomes, okay, you trade us your US currency for our dollars. You start to buy our resources. We use that US dollar to go get our machinery. Whatever we can't, necessarily make because we don't have the raw resources. There are other countries that manufacture things that'll just sell it to you on a non-racist point of view. They just want to make sure that you got the money and can pay for it. So, especially with Bitcoin and like dark web and all of the like, we could get whatever we needed. It just, again, it falls back onto organization of that. And it doesn't take everybody at first.
Exactly.
Once you see a mass of people doing something, we just turn it into the thing to do. As all of these injustices go on, I see, being on the streets where I am, I see much more, Black consciousness, Black awareness. Shopping at Black-owned businesses is becoming a popular thing to do, or at least to talk about. You know what I mean? And I've been introduced to startups that are in different sectors, IT and energy and that type of thing, where people around the country are starting these businesses. We just have to fund them. We just have to use them. We have to bring them into our organization saying, okay, you might not be able to combat with Pepco, but we're not even using Pepco. We just need our first one. So you could be our first one and become the Pepco for us. Like
exactly.
So,
Great alternative.
It's just looking at where we are right now and just saying, okay, how do we get a movie theater? How do we get a mattress manufacturing, store or whatever? How do we do childcare? How do we do schools? How do we do everything that we need, everything that we use in our day-to-day in the United States? We can make for ourselves. And they just have to be networked together.
Exactly.
The school that leads into the trade school, that leads into the internship, that leads into the corporation. Like how they have a school to prison pipeline, we can have a school to labor pipeline. Create that ourselves, like from seed to seed, like
to school to labor. School to labor pipeline. I like that.
School to labor
man.
pipeline.
I like that. What I was going to say.
In every sector, literally.
That's like some real Booker T. Washington type stuff, man.
Hey, man, I read from the greats, and I know that, I believe in channeling energy. So, the more that you face yourself in that direction, their energy becomes part of us. We're living, breathing manifestations of Garvey and Booker T and shit, Tucson, Louverture, you know, everyone, you know, all of our ancestors manifest through us. So, you know, we just have the technology to take their thought processes forward, you know, even further beyond even what they might have thought, you know.
That's what I'm saying. That's the whole point, man. We got to progress. We got to understand who we are. We got to,
exactly.
Brother, I just want to thank you for coming on, man. Just really,
Definitely.
enlightening us, man. I think organization, I agree with you wholeheartedly, and I know that, several decades from now or even sooner, when we have the pieces of what we need and we're closer to self-determination, that I will remember this conversation. It is about organization, man.
Definitely about organization. It's about momentum. It's about persistence, and it's about having a basis to move from. If we all just keep it in our minds of saying, okay, we're building this for ourselves, because where we are right now, frankly, they don't want us here. So if you don't want us here, then that's cool. We'll do our own thing, and we'll have the means to protect it, and we're going to thrive the same way how they tried to do before, whether it be, like I said, the UNIA concept, or whether it's the, I can't think of the name of the organization, but the one in Philly where they
Move.
Move.
Yeah,
whether it be that concept, whether
very
it be however
yeah.
concept, you know what I mean? Whichever concept you want to take it as, like, it'll all be aggregated into one, again, black hole. It's just what we need to do. And I feel like that meetings like this and the think tanks like this and, the mobilization groups that are out here, these are incremental steps that all have to be made. We can't really skip a step in any of this.
Yeah, and it takes time.
Rome wasn't built in a day. Rome wasn't built in a day. But however, we have the technology to do more in a day than they were able to do in decades.
Exactly.
So with that in mind, it really becomes about creativity and how to best use our technology and best use our information in creative ways to get our job
done. Exactly. Man. Shout out to Baba Doc, y'all.
Peace. Peace. I appreciate this platform, man.
We want y'all to join us. We're gonna be here on Thursday again. So we're here on the 6th and the 13th, the 100th anniversary of the RBG. So we're definitely gonna be reasoning some more. Perfect opportunity for us to talk about self-determination and organization. And in the meantime, y'all can just watch a recording of this on the page, and we'll be back, y'all. If y'all got any questions at any time, leave it on the comments and we'll answer it next time. All right. Anything you want to say, Doc, before we sign off?
If anybody's doing anything, or anybody may have a thought to do anything and may not know how to implement it, maybe you don't think that your idea is big enough, chances are your idea is a small part and a small incremental piece in something that we need. So reach out to me, reach out to Sam, reach out to somebody who you see has their head on their shoulders in the right direction in terms of our organization. And I guarantee you'll fit. You'll fit. There's pieces for everybody. Everybody has a role to play. So don't think that your idea is too small. Don't think that you're too small. Think more of yourself and have a higher esteem of what you're capable of, and we can do it.
Shay, get in where you fit in, y'all. That's the message, y'all.
Yes, sir.
All right, family. We'll see y'all next week, man. Much love to y'all, man. Much love, Doc. Thanks for your time, bro.
Peace and blessings. Peace and blessings.
All right, family. African unity and power, y'all.
Ever forward, never backwards.
Shay.